Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is a bit of a fun one. I was very inspired by a video that I saw from Angelica Nyqvist a few months ago where she was trying cult products that she never tried. I think the title was something like that. And I started thinking, I actually have a lot of cult products that have entered my collection this year that I feel like I'm the last person to try. I thought it might be a fun idea to jump on and give you my first impressions of products that you may already have been using for years. You might have these palettes in your collection or have had them in the past even. And so I have a few eyeshadow palettes that I've acquired this year that I remember the hype around them being really, really high, but I myself have yet to try them. A little bit about my makeup history. So I have always worn makeup since I was a teenager, and I was always into makeup, I guess, but I had my key palettes, I had my Urban Decay Naked palettes, and my Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance, and those were kind of my palettes that I used to death for years. And then when I really started getting into the kind of eyeshadow palette culture, I realized that I didn't have any color in my collection, and so a lot of my focus went to palettes with lots of color. And I realized recently that most of the palettes in my collection are very, very colorful palettes. And there's a few kind of key neutral palettes that I just completely missed the hype around. I've sort of been playing catch up in the makeup world, especially this year, and finally adding some neutrals back into my collection. So I'm going to give you my first impressions on some cult palettes that I know a lot of people love. So if that sounds good, please stay tuned, and I am going to pass you along to myself from the future creating this look right here with the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. All right, jumping right in with the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. I'm going to go into the shade White Peach to set my lid. I've already primed with my Ulta Matte Eyeshadow Primer. Actually, this might be a little bit light for a lid setting shade, so I might just keep this shade to the inner corner and maybe a little bit up under the brow as like a subtle highlight. But then for the rest of my lid, I'll use Peaches and Cream, which looks like it might just be a little bit deeper and less kind of stark as a lid setting shade for me. Yep, much closer to my skin tone too. So I've used this palette, I think I've only used it one time, and I just grabbed for one of the neutral browns for the crease and then one of the lighter shimmers for just like a really quick running out the door look. But I have yet to really delve into it as a palette, and I know many of you probably have this palette or have had this palette in the past. So I'm looking forward to joining the club. Thinking for today, I kind of want to do something a little bit brown and smoky, maybe a little bit taupey as well. So I'm going to start, as I normally do, with some brown mattes. There's not really like a perfect transition shade in this palette. I think the closest thing is going to be Puree, which is a warm brown. And just putting that through the crease lightly. So yeah, this palette has been on wild discounts lately. I found mine at TJ Maxx for like $16 or something. So if you're like me and you never tried this palette and you were interested, maybe look around because I know they're discontinuing it, and the prices on this palette just keep getting lower and lower every time I see it discounted somewhere. But it's also one of those palettes that I think a lot of people love, and I've heard so many people who have just raved and raved about this palette. And this is actually my first Too Faced palette in the tin packaging. I just never was a Too Faced consumer when I first started getting into makeup. When I first started getting into makeup, I had the Urban Decay Naked palettes and eventually the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. But yeah, I just never, I don't know, I never went for any of the Too Faced ones. But I've heard that the shadows in the tin packaging are like their best quality. So, I mean, so far so good. I know I've only used a couple of shades so far. Let's go in with Charmed, I'm Sure, which is it's a little bit more of a cool toned brown. I will say this palette is a little bit tough to show on camera because of the mirror, and you can't really open it out flat very well. So just doing my best here, but I'm just gonna put this in the outer corner and start to build up this outer part of my eye. I think it would be really fun though if you have this palette, if you would comment and just let us know your story. Did you get this one for Christmas? Was this one that you bought for yourself? Maybe one that you've used for special occasions in your life, or maybe like an everyday palette. Let us know if you have any go-to looks with this palette, because I feel like a lot of people have this one. And it's true what they say, it does smell really nice. It smells like peach. Okay, so those are blending together really nicely. I think it's definitely a buildable matte formula, which, as I feel like I say in every video, is my favorite kind of matte eyeshadow formula, where I feel like I can build it slowly and just make sure it's really well blended as I'm building it too. So let's see, what do I want to do? There's a couple of nice bronzy taupey shades. We've got Caramelized, which is a little bit more warm toned, and this shade here called Cobbler, which is a little bit more taupey and cool toned. This palette offers up a lot in terms of, like, you could do a purple look, you could do a green look, you could do a peach look, you can do warm browns, you can do cool browns. I do think the color story of this one lends itself to a lot of different kinds of looks. I'm gonna try for a cool toned smoky eye. So I'm gonna take the shade Georgia. I guess I'm just gonna use this on my finger. I don't know. I don't know how people typically use the Too Faced shimmer formula, but I'm just gonna try it with my finger and see how I like it. And I'm putting that on the outer half of my eye. I think that looks really good. So far, so good. No glitter glue or anything yet. It's not too cool toned either. I can see that there's a little bit of bronzy gold to this shade as well, which makes me think that this shade and the shade Caramelized might be pretty close. So let's actually swatch both of them. So this one is the shade Cobbler and this one is the shade Caramelized, and they are very close in tone. Caramelized is just a touch deeper. So I think I'll actually add a little bit of Caramelized just on the very outer corner, because I think it's gonna fit right in with the look that I'm doing. So we'll do like a soft bronzy gradient across the lid. The shade Cobbler almost has a little bit of a rose gold to it. I'm not sure if that will show up on the eyes, but in the swatch, it definitely does. Here, ignore the blush swatches at the top of my hand, but here's those two shades swatched out as well. So this one is Cobbler and this one is Caramelized. You can see they're pretty close. I'm just gonna blend out what we've got so far before moving on. Really nice and blendable shimmers as well as mattes. I feel like, wow, that pretty much just blended itself. Things are getting a little dark over on this corner, so I'm just gonna go back in with the lid setting brush and kind of soften that out. There we go. So now I'm gonna go in with what I think is Jessica Braun's favorite shade. She's mentioned it several times in her videos that she loves this palette simply for the shade Luscious. It's like a champagne kind of a color. It's not super warm. There's not a ton of pink to it, but I'm just gonna put that right in this inner part of the lid and blend it over into those browns. This actually reminds me of the kinds of looks that I would do with my Naked palettes back in the day. I'm just gonna touch up the shade Cobbler a little bit where I blended that lightest shade over the top, just so we don't lose it. Okay, and then for the lower lash line, let's take Charmed, I'm Sure, which is the cooler of the two brown mattes that I used, and just pull that along my lower lash line. And then I'll just take a touch of the shade Puree to kind of blend that out and soften it a bit. Puree being the warmer of the mattes. And I think this looks really nice. Is it boring? Maybe. But I don't know. I like boring sometimes. I like a neutral brown smoky eye. I will say these shimmers are a little bit more like satins. So now that I've played around with lots of different eyeshadow formulas, I have gotten used to a really impactful shimmer, like something like an Odin's Eye shimmer or a Beauty Bay shimmer, where it's just like takes your breath away with the amount of shine and drama that it has. And these are very much more so like everyday shimmers. Like they do have a bit of radiance to them, I guess you would say, but it's not glitter and it's not super in your face. So it almost doesn't even look like I have shimmer on my eyes, I think, until I move my face and the shimmer particles in there catch the light. It's just interesting. I'm not saying it's a bad thing because I still think that this is a really pretty way of wearing eyeshadow, but it is interesting to compare different shimmer formulas between brands. But I think this is everything for the eyeshadow. So let me run and do some mascara. I'm thinking of maybe even adding some eyeliner as well. So let me go do that and I'll be right back to give you my first impressions of the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. Okay, so we are back with mascara on, and I even added some eyeliner, so I hope you're proud of me. I used my Hourglass Voyeur waterproof gel eyeliner in the shade Cave. I kind of smudged that out on the top, and then in the waterline I used the ColourPop cream gel liner in the shade Wildcat because I felt like it, I don't know, paired really nicely with kind of the bronziness of the eye look. And listen, there's nothing wrong with this eye look. I like this eye look a lot. I think this is very comfortable and I really like this look. I think this is a really nice way of elevating an everyday look to something a little bit more sultry and glamorous. I would 100% wear this. I would wear this to the office. I would wear this to a date night or some kind of occasion or something. I feel like it's sort of like a nice, flattering, all occasion makeup that's very wearable. And I think so far, the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette really lends itself to those kinds of looks. But there's still color in this palette that I have yet to play with that I am very excited to dip into. But the colors, even though there is so much color in this palette, the green is a muted green. The purple is a muted purple. You know what I'm saying? The peaches technically are a color, but they're still very natural in terms of their tone. So I get the hype around this one. I get why a lot of people like it, especially if you like everyday neutral makeup, but maybe you dip a toe into a colorful eyeshadow look from time to time, but you still want it to tie in with, you know, a general kind of natural makeup look. This palette just seems easy. Like, I feel like I just threw some mattes on, threw some shimmers on, and it all blended together and worked perfectly. So I do get the hype on this one, I will say, but I am looking forward to playing with it more and working more with the colorful shades in this palette. So that is probably the last first impressions of the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette the world will ever know. I feel like the last person to try this palette, but it's still good, and I think it still stands up to the hype. The only thing is, if you are looking for like indie quality shimmers, this isn't going to be for you. This is much more of a kind of natural soft satin shimmer effect on the eyes, but I still think it's really pretty. So that's that on Sweet Peach. I'm going to pass you over now to future Sarah to see another look with another palette. Okay, we are back with my second viral eyeshadow palette that I never tried, which is the Tartelette In Bloom palette. Another really reflective one, so I'm going to try to show it to you without blinding you. But I think lots of you will know what this one looks like. It's one of the classic kind of examples that I think of when I think of a neutral palette. I like the way that the palette is laid out because it gives you kind of, I really like the way this palette is laid out because row by row it gives you kind of like a look. So it goes from kind of more cool toned to neutral to really warm toned on the bottom row. I think I've used this palette once so far, but I was actually gifted this from Dermstore, and it's a palette that I've always wanted and I've seen so many people talk about, but this is my first time actually digging in and trying it, apart from just like dipping my finger into a shade or two. So the first thing that I thought of when I saw this palette was doing like a really classic, cool toned glam sort of a look. So I think I'm actually going to go more toward this top row here and maybe even do like a smoky liner look. That's just kind of what I'm feeling. But I am going to dip into the shade Flower Child first. Is this one here. And I'm going to set my lid. I've primed my lids, of course, with my Ulta Beauty Matte Eyeshadow Primer. I think I actually saw, was it Julia Adams who recently repurchased this palette and has been using it in lots of her tutorials, which I felt like was a good sign because Julia Adams has tried lots of eyeshadow palettes in her day. If y'all don't follow Julia, she's one of my favorite YouTubers. I just love the looks that she does. But yeah, she's been dipping into this palette a lot in her tutorials, and I felt like, yeah, that was, if it has Julia's sign of approval to where she's going to repurchase it after already having used it for years, just to have it back in her collection, I felt like that was a really good sign. Just off the bat, I am noticing that these shadows are really powdery. And that's something that I've noticed in the other Tarte palette that I have, which is, I think it was a BoxyCharm exclusive. It's called like the Sunrise palette or something. That doesn't bother me, but just something to note. I didn't have the same amount of kick up with the Too Faced Sweet Peach, although there was a little bit of kick up with that one too. This one's like tons of kick up when I dip my brush in. So just something to observe and be aware of. I'm now going to take a fluffy brush and the shade Jet Setter, which is the kind of brownie crease shade in the top row here. And I'm going to put that through my crease. Is this a palette that a lot of you have? I imagine it probably is. I feel like these Tarte palettes in this cute little packaging were really popular. There's a few in the line, and I don't even know all of their names, but yeah, lots of people had one. There's one that's more of like a tortoise shell that I think is more warm tones. I think there's another one that's more pink tones. Also smells really good. By the way, it smells like vanilla. This eyeshadow formula feels very thin, almost a little bit sheer, and that's something that I noticed in the other Tarte palette I have as well. Again, that's not something that I mind, but I do feel like a lot of brands have evolved out of those kinds of formulas to create like just thicker, creamier, more high impact, high pigment formulas these days. But brands like Tarte, Too Faced, Anastasia Beverly Hills, even Urban Decay, that they were really kind of at the forefront of the big boom of eyeshadow palettes back in the day, I feel like they all had similar formulas. They were all dry, a little bit more powdery, and a little bit more sheer. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me in this palette because this is an older palette from Tarte. So I'm now going to take the shade Smoke Show. Kind of a charcoal gray. It's not quite black. And I've got it on an angled brush. I'm just going to start sketching out a wing. I've done this kind of a look before in other videos. It's one of my favorite looks when I'm not doing like a halo eye or a light to dark kind of gradient eye. I think this brush is kind of frayed out, so it's not the sharpest angle anymore, but that's all right. I'm not taking this all the way across, probably about halfway. Give a more kind of feline or lifted effect to the eyes that way too. Okay, this is a Spectrum and KJH 18 brush. I think it's going to give me a little bit more of a blend. I feel like I've lost too much of the shadow at the lash line because these are so powdery, they kind of blend away. What do they call that? There's a word that the beauty gurus use. Is it over blendable? I'm actually going to dip into a little bit of a warmer shade. This is the shade Rebel, kind of the warm brown in the palette, and just bring a little bit more warmth here. I I still struggle with cool tones. I want to like them, but I always end up having to put at least one warm shade in the mix. So this would be a really nice look for those of you who, like me, struggle a bit with eyeliner. But maybe you just want a little bit of extra definition around the lash line, or you want that more kind of lifted cat eye effect. You can just do it with eyeshadow and make it super smudgy, and then it's less noticeable if it's not perfect. And then when I get to the end of the wing here, I'm just kind of connecting it back up into my crease. Taking a dab of that warm shade again to do that. This would also be a good one to do before you've done your foundation, so you can kind of just clean up that edge a little bit, but I'm not too worried about it today. But if I was doing this for like an event or something, I definitely would do my foundation after my eyeshadow and try to get a cleaner line. I'm actually going to take that deepest shade on my blending brush and just kind of pat. There we go. Sometimes that works a little bit better with shades that feel like they overblend and you just kind of lose them. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that so far. So I'm going to take a little bit of that deepest shade Smoke Show, and I'm just going to connect my lower lash line up to the outer corner, really, really close under my lashes on the bottom here, and not pulling it all the way over, because remember, we're going for a more feline eye shape here. So just keeping that kind of on the outer quarter of the lower lash line. And then I'll grab my warm shade, Rebel, and just slightly blend that out. Yeah, like I said, I always like to blend out a cool tone shade with a warm tone just to make it less stark on my skin tone, but that's just me and my preferences. So now let's try some sparkle. So I guess I'm gonna go for the shade Rocker, which is, it looks like it's kind of a taupey silver. Again, like with the Sweet Peach palette, we have more of a satin going on here than like a really impactful glittery shimmer. Although this shade in particular looks like it's more of a satin than some of the other shimmer shades. There's only 3 shimmers in here again. That's so interesting. So many of these palettes have a lot fewer shimmers and a lot more mattes. I might put a little bit of this shade Funny Girl over the top, just because that one seems like it has a little bit more sparkle to it. But starting with Rocker, I'm just going to use that to help blend everything going on the outer corner. And so I'm going to bring it in about halfway. I actually really like the way that that's pairing. It's kind of helping the outer corner look a little bit more seamless and camouflage any messiness. It does have a bit of a sheen to it, so that's actually really, really pretty. I like that shade a lot more than I thought I would. And then I'm just gonna dip into the shade Funny Girl, like I mentioned. This one looks like it has a bit more impact than the first shade that we used. You can see it's sort of that creamy metallic finish, kind of like a champagne gold. And I'm just going to tap that toward the inner corner. This is a really nice occasion makeup, I think. Especially if you're gonna wear like a red or a bold lip, I think this would look really pretty. I'm just gonna dip into a little bit more of Jet Setter, and I'm gonna mix it with a bit of Rebel just to give myself a little bit more warmth through the crease and just touch that up a bit. I think that's the look. If you wanted to at this point, you could add like a liquid liner, but I think I'm just gonna leave it soft. I'm gonna go add some mascara, and then I will be back to show you the final look with the Tartelette in Bloom palette. Okay, and here is the final look. I actually really love the way that this came out. It's simple, but it's really wearable and still glam. I feel like it would go with any kind of blush or lip. Could be taken up a notch by maybe adding like a glitter topper over everything, or even taken down a notch by just making the liner a little bit less dark. I definitely see why so many people liked this palette. It certainly seems like it could become a real comfort palette, and I think I said that about Sweet Peach too. Like one of those palettes that you just dip into because you can rely on the formula, you know you're probably gonna like the look, and it's really easy to put looks together and you don't have to put a ton of thought into what shades are gonna pair with what and what things are gonna blend together. So I'm really happy to have it in my collection for that reason. Do I think that there are better shimmer formulas out there? Yes. Obviously, eyeshadow has been updated and there's been new kind of innovative brands coming to the forefront in terms of really impactful and creamy shimmers. But I think there's always something to be said for a more subtle, wearable sheen to an eyeshadow. And I understand why a lot of people would like that look more than something really in your face and potentially more difficult to blend. I think the mattes are really good as well. They're very, very blendable. Some might say they overblend in that if you blend too much, they sort of disappear. But again, I think a lot of people would like that because it means that you're not left with really harsh eyeshadow, and it's a lot easier to get a more natural, kind of cohesive and soft blended look. So I think this one is worth the hype. I don't think people who are eyeshadow connoisseurs who have a ton of indie shadows or single shadows or Natasha Denona and Pat McGrath shadows need this necessarily, but my feeling is that many of you probably already have this or have had it in your collection at some point in time. So let us know in the comments your thoughts on the Tarte Tartelette in Bloom or any of the Tartelette palettes. I'd be really interested to know what you all think. So I think that's everything for this one. I think we've got one more palette for this video, so I'm going to pass you over to me. Hello, I am back with another viral cult favorite palette. This one is the Naughty Nudes from Huda Beauty. I purchased this palette in the 4th of July sale that Sephora was running. I do have two other Huda palettes. I have the Mercury Retrograde and the Rose Quartz, and I really enjoy both of those palettes. I find that they're really unique in my collection, but also on the palette market in terms of the color stories and the formulas. But I think I was a little bit of a late Huda Beauty user. It took me a while to really start using the brand, and this was one of the palettes that came out a couple years ago. So it's a little bit more of a neutral color story than either of the Huda Beauty palettes I already have. But there's definitely some pinks and purples in here too, like some berry, cranberry shades. So I'm excited. I'm excited to try this one out. I wonder if any of you have this palette too. Let me know in the comments. My experience with Huda Beauty is that a lot of the times what the shades look like in the pan is not exactly the same as how they translate on the eye. I think for that reason I am going to try a few of these neutral browns just to see like what they look like on the eye. But I really don't know what look I want to do. I feel like I've done neutral looks so far this video, so this one I might try to kind of pull in some cranberries and purples, but we'll see. Let me zoom you in and we'll get started. I'm going to start by taking a big fluffy brush in the shade Hypnotic, which is like the lightest of the matte browns. It's almost like a beigey shade, just to see what we're working with here, and just put that through the crease. So already, even though that shade looks pretty light within the palette, it's showing up as a slightly deeper brown on me. Actually like a perfect transition shade for me. I think just out of curiosity, I'm also going to take the shade Rough, which seems like it's like a step down from Hypnotic in terms of depth, but they're really, really similar. And I just kind of want to see what the difference is. These look like they're showing up a lot, maybe warmer than they look in the palette, at least on my skin tone. They're looking very warm, which I like, and I'm actually kind of happy about because I feel like with the purples and pinks, the warmth is gonna blend a little bit better. But Huda Beauty and Natasha Denona, I think, are the two brands that I always have that experience with, of looking into the pan and thinking I know what the color's gonna look like and then getting it on my eyes and being like, what happened? What happens between the pan and my face that changes colors? Okay, that's looking nice so far. Do I want to keep it brown or do I want to go in with a little bit of cranberry? I feel like I have to use this shade over here called Untamed. It's like the color of the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk eyeliner that I recently had in an empties video. It's the perfect burgundy, like true burgundy, not too purple leaning, or at least that's the way it looks in the pan. I'm gonna grab some of that shade and use it to start deepening up the outer corner here. I love that shade. I'm gonna take a little bit more of the shade Rough, which was the deeper of the two brown transition shades, and just blend out that edge. I feel like this palette has the potential to be my most used Huda palette because the Rose Quartz and the Mercury Retrograde are both beautiful, but I have to be kind of in the mood for playing with makeup. This kind of color story is like definitely more of my comfort zone when it comes to makeup, so I feel like I'm more likely to just reach into this one any given day and throw a look together. This does have one of those weird petri dish shades like the Rose Quartz has. I typically, if I'm going to use that shade, I'll use it as a base to grab onto the shimmers like a glitter glue. So I might do that today. I'm trying to decide what shimmer to use. The shade Irresistible looks very tempting. It looks a little bit taupey. Ooh, yeah. I think I'm definitely going to go for that one. It's like I don't really know how to describe this shade. It looks like a rose gold, but a little bit on the cooler side. So it's almost like a rose taupe. I'm definitely going to use that. Let's try, just for fun, a little bit of the slippery shade as a glitter glue. These shades are kind of gimmicky, and I know a lot of people can't stand them, but since it's in the palette, I might as well use it, and then just press that shimmer right over the top. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love that color. Oh my gosh. And the way it pairs with that matte cranberry shade, it's like the perfect match. Wow. I'm trying to see if there's a good inner corner shade in this palette. I feel like my best bet might be Flower Power, which is one of those like tie-dye shades. It looks kind of goldy tan in the pan, but I just kind of put my finger into the lightest part and it looks, oh, yeah, that's perfect. It's like a perfect light gold for an inner corner. This look like practically built itself. Like it just came together so easily. I'm now going to take a little bit more of Untamed, that burgundy shade underneath the lower lash line. I feel like that came together too easily. Like I should have had to do more, but I really, really love the way that this look came out. So I'm actually going to stop here. So I will go do mascara and then I'll come back, show you the finished look, and then give you some final thoughts or first impressions on the Naughty Nudes palette. Okay, we're back with the finished look. I used my What's Up Beauty Watch Me mascara and I really like the way that this came out. It's impactful, but still somehow subtle and natural. It's dramatic, but still very wearable. I was just thinking while I was doing my mascara, because I've mentioned I have two other Huda palettes that I really, really love, but I don't think I've ever been able to fully appreciate the Huda Beauty formula in these large palettes because I've never had a palette that was just like very easy wearable tones. The Rose Quartz is really, really unique and beautiful and interesting, but for some reason I don't gravitate towards those kind of cooler, rosier, more like cool purple tones. And then the Mercury Retrograde is also beautiful and very unique. It has lots of fun colors and fun formulas, but it's just not like an everyday palette for me. I can see this palette becoming an everyday palette for me, and it's really just kind of hitting home how nice the Huda Beauty formula really is when I can just kind of throw a look together and love the result. So for the first time, I'm really able to appreciate how good the mattes are. They're so buttery smooth and blendable. The shimmers, obviously I've only used a couple of the offerings that this palette even has, but just glide onto the eyes and really pack a punch. And I'm thrilled. I'm super excited about this palette. So that is the Huda Beauty Naughty Nudes.